Hello and welcome my partners in crime. So lovely to see you all again, and we've got so many more subscribers, so thank you to all the new people. Welcome to Murder Analysed. Now I'm Christina Moore, and so I wanted to just sort of change it up a little bit at the beginning because I usually say about subscriptions and everything last, so I'm going to say it first so you know what to do. You can put the thumbs up, which helps with the algorithm. You can subscribe to the channel by hitting anywhere really, I think on the little watermark that Lacey puts on there for you to subscribe. You can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook, and you can also catch these on Spotify podcast. So that bit out the way, welcome, and here we go. Now a few of these cases that I've done are unsolved cases. So the first lot of unsolved cases, this is linked by DNA, so it's the same killer. And I wanted to link them for that reason. I've put two, I think it was Eve Stafford and Lynn Whedon on it. But there is also another missing persons, or, you know, unsolved, not missing, but unsolved murder within this as well. So this is like 3 in 1 really. So listen, I mean no disrespect by not doing individual cases on these victims. But it's important that how they link is also stated, and these are quite old cases and stuff, 1975 time. So it's really important that they link together in that way, and we show how it also shows really that there probably still is a serial killer at large out there that attacked these poor girls, murdered these poor girls. But it also shows that sometimes when you are profiling a case and you're investigating a case, is that when we look at, you know, the geographics of it, we look at victimology, look at all this sort of stuff, do these cases link? For a long, long time, these cases didn't link. It wasn't until many years later, I think 2011, or 2007, that DNA linked these cases. So it's important to understand that not every killer's MO remains the same. Just because we might think that a killer's MO is one way doesn't mean to say he doesn't change very quickly, and that can be then more difficult to catch a killer like this. So this is the case really of Eve Stafford and Lynn Whedon, and it's about really a killer's DNA that linked these murders. So Eve Stafford, she was born the 28th of December 1953, and she died on the 18th of March 1975. Now she was English Playboy Bunny Club and model, and she was murdered in her own flat. Lynn Whedon was born on the 11th of November 1958, and she died on the 10th of September 1975. So we had a murder now in the March, and then another one in the September of 1975. Now, Lynn was a schoolgirl, and she was raped and beaten to death 6 months after Eve was. Neither case has ever been solved. There's still unsolved cases, these, even though some DNA was found much, much later. And we'll go into that in a little while. So on the surface, as I said, there's nothing really that's connected these two murders at the time. One victim, you know, Eve, really lives this wild, glamorous life. And she was found dead in East London in her bedroom, and her throat had been slit. And it was assumed really by an unknown lover at the time. This is what they assumed. Now the other, she was 15-year-old at the time, you know, this schoolgirl, and she was raped and bludgeoned to death as she walked home from a night out with friends. And it was about 6 months later, really. So almost 30 years, or probably more than 30 years later, the DNA evidence proved that the same attacker or killer killed both Eve and Lynn. Now, so this now, for the detectives, it sort of threw them off a little bit, because the cases were so different. So the victimology was different. You had, one was a bunny girl. She lived in a lifestyle, I suppose, where she would have come into contact maybe with more people. Lynn was a schoolgirl. They both had no connections at all to each other. They didn't know each other. Their lifestyles were totally different. His MO then was different as well, because, where Lynn was killed in her home, in her flat in London, in daylight, Lynn was killed really in an alleyway. It looked like he lay in wait for her. So his MO has totally changed. And I think this is why I want to do these cases together and actually add the last one in after. Because it's important to remember when we look, and especially for a lot of students that we have on here and people that are really interested in profiling, is sometimes what you see is not real. It's not, we think as profilers, okay, this profile, it takes some guts, I'm telling you, for any perpetrator to get into someone's house or be invited into someone's house in broad daylight and murder them so viciously, actually, as Eve was murdered. And then the other side of the killer is where he lays in wait outside in the middle of 11 o'clock, I think. Lynn was murdered in the evening, 11 p.m. And so they don't believe that she knew her killer at all. He just lay in wait, and if it wasn't Lynn, it could have been a victim, really. So his MO is totally different with all the murders. And I think it's really important to understand this about this killer, because this is probably one of the reasons why he hasn't been caught. And probably for many, many years you're looking for a certain killer. We're looking for, in Eve's case especially, they were looking for and focused on actually ex-boyfriends and people that may have frequented the clubs and stuff she worked in. You could have even added stalker into that. Not that they would have even thought of that in 1975, it wasn't really around then. But they never linked the two because the two cases were so far apart. So evidence was lost then, because when you don't link something so early on, it was impossible. No one would have ever thought that these cases were linked in any way at all. The victims were different, everything about these cases were different. And if it wasn't for finding that DNA 30 years later plus, these cases would still be unsolved, but they would be separate. So now it's much easier for the police now, because you're thinking now about a perpetrator that could have done or potentially done many, many more crimes, murders, and they just haven't been linked because the MO was different. So this is a really important case for that. So let's start with Eve's story. So Eve Stafford, she was found dead at her boyfriend's flat, or by her boyfriend, sorry, they shared a flat together on the 18th of March 1975. And their flat was in Lyndhurst Drive in Leighton. Her throat had been cut between 8 and 12 times. So this was a vicious, vicious attack on her. She was found partially unclothed. She had nylon stockings tied her around one of her ankles, and her hands had been bound with a scarf. On the day of her murder, police found out she had visited Camden, Bayswater, and there was no signs that she had been followed or anything else. From what witnesses have said, she was last seen, I think, about 4:30 p.m. and or heard actually, not seen, at 4:30 p.m. because she lived in the flat. The woman below her flat said that she heard a male and a female voice talking, and this followed by a bump. So Eve was a nude model, a bunny girl at the Playboy Club in Mayfair. She lived with her pop star boyfriend, who had a string of lovers, both male and female. So when we talk about victimology, Eve's case, you would have to look at everything to do with her. So I can understand why the police at first thought it was a disgruntled lover, or something like that with Eve. And I think by the way she was found, because she was partially undressed, it looked like, and there was no break and entry, there was no forced entry. Whoever come in that home was invited in. So it looks like Eve knew her killer. She knew him. But whether she was having some affair with him, whether she was having some relationship with him, it's unclear. But it looks like she actually knew her killer. Now, despite her lifestyle, she was quite a naive girl. All she ever wanted to be was a model. That's all she ever wanted to be. One of her friends said, who was a fellow bunny girl as well, that she was desperate to be a model all her life. That's all she wanted to be. She loved it. And I don't know if she was quite young and naive, and when she got into this sort of lifestyle that she became, or her sexual preferences changed and things, and she went along with it. But she enjoyed her life. She was a very pretty girl. She was doing what she wanted to do. She had a boyfriend, and I think he understood her lifestyle and stuff. And she was happy with that. But someone, obviously, was out to kill Eve. Now, some of the clients at this, because it's Mayfair, right? It's Mayfair in London. So lots of money, a lot of stuff goes on around there. And she was a bunny girl. And she had lots and lots of photos that she was very proud of and used to send them home to her mum and dad. Look at who I've met today and stuff. So I think it was Eric Morecambe and Sid James, which is, if you're English and you're older like me, you'd remember these. These would be the sort of people, that would frequent these places. Everyone, in London, it was like a nightclub and it was a bunny club. It wasn't, strips and all this sort of thing, but they were bunny girls. Okay, they were bunny girls, and she was a nude model. And, I think she liked the notoriety, she liked meeting these sort of people, and she liked the photographs, and she was proud of herself. She was making money, living the life, sending the photos home to her mum and dad, and they were proud of her. They were proud of her because really, Eve had achieved her goal. Her whole goal was to be a model, and especially in them days, a bunny girl. So Eve, I think she came from Warrington in Cheshire, and she left there in about 1970 to come to London to make her fortune. She was angered, I think, at this point as well, around this time, by her management, or the management of the club. She was frustrated that she had not been picked, actually, for the Playboy magazine, so she appeared in the rival Mayfair magazine instead. Now, her boss was a bit pissed off about this, because she was actually one of the favourite bunny girls. And in them days, we didn't have the internet and everything else. It was magazines. And so she made then the centrefold of the Mayfair magazine, but not of the Playboy magazine. And that's really, I think, did anger her boss. Now, her boss was well known for having relations with bunny girls and stuff like that. And I think at this point, he sort of told her that's why she wasn't working. He sort of said, that's it, I'm really fed up because you've done a wrong thing, really. And I don't think he sacked her, but I think he suspended her for a while for doing that. But she just wanted to be a centrefold, and I don't think she cared the consequences for doing it. So whether that has something to do with the murder, I'm not sure. Again, you have to think of the people that frequented this club. There was many people, wealthy people. There was a lot of people actually questioned, celebrities questioned, and their names have never been released. There was also wealthy businessmen from overseas. There was, lots of people that frequented this place. that could have at any point had any reason, I suppose, to want to kill her. But I think when I look at this case, when I look at Eve's lifestyle and stuff, I think it was probably a stalker. I don't know if it was this rich and famous man, because I don't think she was interested in that anyway. I mean, a fella that she was living with was in a band, and he'd really, done lots of different things with, different sort of high up bands. But then he'd sort of lost it, and he was just doing a normal job after that. So I don't think that Eve was about the money. She knew she could earn her own money. I think, so when we talk about the motive for a murder, listen, there's loads, isn't there, really, when you think about it. But I think what we would look at today was that there was a predatory stalker on her. And a lot of these predators like this, you're showing them attention, anything, whether it's negative attention or not. She didn't even know, I don't think, she'd been stalked. But she knew the person, without a doubt. She knew the person. Now, whether she knew him just as a friend or an associate of somebody else, but she knew him. And the motive was literally to kill Eve. That was really it. So on the 18th of March, her boyfriend came home from work, and Eve's mutilated body actually was found on a mattress beside the bed. So, they didn't use the bed. He didn't kill her on the bed. I mean, when you're thinking of this person, he used a mattress at the side of the bed. And as I said, she was tied up and everything, and she was partially clothed, and I think the whole place was like splattered in blood, and she was splattered in blood. So there was lots of evidence, if you'd like to say, at that point. Now, next to her body was a bunch of dried flowers, and they were wrapped in cellophane and stuff. So, and they were quite cheap. Now, this area where she lived and where she worked, and if you're talking about someone with money coming to see you, and so someone she knew, we obviously knew she knew them, let her in, it wouldn't have been a cheap bunch of dried flowers wrapped in cellophane. Because obviously this bunch of flowers was no way brought in this area at all. They checked, you just couldn't get it. There was like dried grass and leaves and stuff. So listen, I think there's evidence there, and I still say it, because it looks like this person had picked these himself. Now, cellophane, there would be DNA stuff on that cellophane, but we're talking about 1975, right? Now, sometimes, I can achieve, and I rip the bit of cellophane, or I cut it with the scissors, but you're handling cellophane. Now, cellophane with our, oily, fingerprinty fingers is going to leave it, and also it's going to leave DNA. And I think the dried bunch of flowers, these days we would have analysed where these flowers come from. They were dried. Someone's picked them, dried them out. They were cheap, and the reason I keep saying they were cheap, because Mayfair and around this area where she lived was not a cheap area at all. So whoever brought her these flowers, she knew. She knew him, but she didn't know him maybe from the clubs. Or if he was in the clubs, he probably worked in the clubs. He'd done something other than, he could have been a delivery driver, he could have been anything, but he wasn't a wealthy person. He just wasn't, because a wealthy person wouldn't have really brought her, they would have sent them, especially in this area, and they certainly wouldn't have wrapped them in cellophane. So that's sort of telling us something about this perpetrator, really, just in the flowers alone. But of course it's 1975, so there is no DNA, is there? There's fingerprints and stuff, but did they think to take the cellophane, all this, that and the other? Luckily, we have now got lots more, DNA techniques, which hopefully, was they stored? Because as I keep saying, DNA, we keep talking about the advances in DNA, but unless the evidence is kept properly, stored properly, you can't get it. Now, in 1975, they may have thought that these flowers meant nothing. They meant nothing. Where in today's investigation, they would have started off a different avenue of searching. Just how I've explained it there, because they are relevant. They're really relevant to this case. Really are. And it's, I think they had their eye on someone, the police, for many, many years. It was an associate of her boss's, very, very rich man, businessman, and I think they focused on that for many, many years because of her lifestyle, where she lived, what she did. They just assumed it was someone very wealthy. Now, when that man died and the family gave his DNA, it wasn't a match. It wasn't a match at all. So for many, many years, the focus was on the wrong person. Literally, the wrong person. And I think with this case, you're looking for someone that doesn't live that lifestyle at all. Now, you can imagine, can't you? Then this girl was murdered. It comes out in the newspapers what she's doing for a living, her lifestyle. Because in all countries, when we have victims of crime and they are very pretty and they have a different lifestyle to what some of us may live or what some of us may feel is acceptable, people started saying that, oh, she deserves what she got. It was a lover gone wrong. It was this, it was that. It was her fault. That's what Reading people said. She deserved it. It was her fault. I mean, thank God, really, times have changed where we accept people for what they are. And I've always saying all these cases, no matter what you do for a living, no matter what, you have a right to live your life freely, and this poor girl's family, they've lost their child who they loved and adored. She was a great daughter. She'd send her mum home things. She was very young, this girl, I think 23, very young to lose her life. She was a bunny girl, yes. She was a model, yes. But she was murdered, terribly murdered by somebody. And because everyone thought that either she deserved it or she knew the person because she would sleep with both men and women, that she, it's not the police, it's the public, I think held back a lot, really. And it was terrible, really. Yes, she had a colourful sex life, absolutely. And today, I think some people will still be the same on it. But really, a life is a life, and we only get one of it, don't we? We get one life. And for someone to come and take that life away in this way is terrible. But I think for the family, for the mum and the dad, who was devastated by her loss, they had crank calls bombarded with them. Terrible, obscene phone calls, terrible stuff was happening to this family. And 3 years after her murder, her own mother suffered a nervous breakdown because of it. It's really, really upsetting, isn't it, when you think that we don't have empathy for people that lose their children, at any age. And that some people think that murder is acceptable because they don't like your lifestyle. It's just not, and it's not really a good way, I think, to be. So let's talk about Lynne Whedon. As I've said before, it's hard to imagine, isn't it, about these two victims were so different in their lifestyles. And as I said, they did not know each other. There's no link other than the DNA link of the killer that links these two murders. That's it. Different lifestyle, different ages, different everything. So Lynn was hit over the head with a blunt object, and then she was raped on the 3rd of September 1975, 6 months after Eve Stafford's death. She was attacked near her home in Hounslow. So 45 years since Lynn, this schoolgirl, was murdered, detectives continued to appeal actually for vital evidence which could help catch her killer. So it was a Wednesday, it was the 3rd of September 1975, around 11:20 p.m. Lynn, I think she was 16 at the time actually, not 15. Now, Lynn was raped and murdered near her home. So Lynn had been on her way home after an evening out with her friends. She'd had a lovely evening. Now Lynn was on her way home after an evening out with her friends. Now detectives have thought that she was followed on foot at Great West Road, right, this is on the A4, into an alleyway called the Short Hedges, where she was hit with a blunt instrument and then thrown over a fence onto the grounds of like this electrical substation. I don't know if you have them. We have them we used to have more of them, or we used to see more of them. But they either used to be fenced and there was just a little substations, and usually they're overgrown and stuff, but her body was thrown over in one of them. And that is where she was raped. So he'd knocked her out, beaten her, thrown her over, he'd gone over there and raped her in there. Now Lynn was discovered by a local school caretaker whose house overlooked this substation. Despite this, despite all these injuries, she was still alive. She lived. When the police and ambulance arrived at the scene, she was dying, but she was alive. She never regained consciousness, so she couldn't tell them anything about her attacker. And to tell the truth, I think she was attacked from behind, so she wouldn't have remembered it. And she died in West Middlesex Hospital a week later on the 10th of September 1975. So the MOs are totally different here. You had Eve, her throat was slit, 8 to 10 times. There was no knife used here. You hit her over the head. I mean, to tell you the truth, if it was me, and I don't know what Peter Sutcliffe was doing around in 1975, but this is his sort of thing, his early days. But I think with Sutcliffe, he wouldn't have tried to hide the body, he liked to sort of leave them on show. But we just don't know. But I think they've done his DNA, so it's not him. So it's his sort of MO. So listen, there's a serial killer now, right? Because we've got another one coming up in 1975 with totally different MOs. He's going to go into your home, which is very rare for anyone to come into your home and kill you, to tell the truth, in broad daylight. And then you've got the other side of him that follows, attacks from behind, uses no knife, and rapes you and leaves you. And totally different. So I could understand, even now, unless there was DNA evidence, these two crimes wouldn't have been linked at all. Totally different. Totally different. So poor Lynn's cause of death was this single blow, one hit to the head. That's what she died from in the end. She would have survived the rape and everything, but that's what she died from. One single blow to the skull, and it smashed, and it was quite a heavy object actually. So listen, these cases, Eve's case as well was a cold case. There was no real evidence there in 1975. Now, in 2004, Lynn's case was well, it was a cold case, but in 2007 they decided now with the new DNA techniques and stuff like this, showed that the same person committed these murders. So now we've opened the door. So now you think, great, we've got some DNA, we know they're now linked, and they would have had, had a look on all the databases and stuff, and yes, they've got the DNA profile, and they know the profiles of the two, of one killer for the two, but there's no person on the database that matches that DNA. So listen, by this time now both cases are open, aren't they? That's it, it's reopened. Everyone thinks, great, there's hope here. 2007, there's hope. So on BBC Crime Watch, actually, they done this programme and everything and reconstructed it and told everything. And then they brought in more officers and they set up, an incident room and everything. And it was called Operation Stealth. They done it because really, it's invigorating, isn't it, when you think, okay, you've finally got some DNA, you've got two dead girls here, we can finally, or hopefully, we've got much more chance now of solving this murder, even though it's 30 years on, than we had on the day that these girls were murdered. Really, with the advances now in the DNA and the forensics, there's so much more we can do. But, if they're not in a database, because we didn't, I think it was, previous 20 years before that, really, or before, 2007, if he hadn't committed a crime then, his DNA wouldn't be, or if he wasn't caught for not doing a crime, it wouldn't be in a database. So you've got DNA, you've got this profile, and no one to match it with. So frustrating, really is. So I think in 2012, we had the case of what has already been done, the investigation techniques and the forensic techniques in the Stephen Lawrence case. Now, Stephen Lawrence case was one really on forensic stuff. It wasn't really one on much else. And it was the forensic techniques that helped convict them killers, in that they were now using the same techniques to try and convict this killer or try and find this killer, really. So, and that was in 2012, and in 2015 the police issued a fresh appeal. This is like 40 years after this murder, or the murder of Eve Stafford, it was released again. And they wanted now to, because you're thinking someone may have known this killer 40 years on. 40 years on this man's been going. And they, people may feel more relaxed to talk about it and stuff, so that these appeals continue to come out. And the same as what we do on here. We do these cases to refresh anyone's memory. These cases are very old, but sometimes people are in fear of saying something about a perpetrator for fear that something's going to happen to them, and that perpetrator may have now died, or may have, be in a position where he can't hurt that person anymore. And lots of people come forward, and this is why people do appeals, even though it's 40 years after. And as our techniques and forensics and that are now, and like forensic genealogy, and all this stuff that we're using now to find out whether the perpetrator had the brothers, this, that, and the other, can go right back, so we can try and track this killer. But at present, there's nothing actually on it, really nothing. So think about this. The man who carried out these crimes is now of a different generation. He's older. He's the older generation now. I think, some police officer has said, I think his name was Noel McShute, Chief Inspector Noel, and he said that he was hoping that the perpetrator, after all these years, would have remorse and come forward. It's just not going to happen, is it? It's just, they don't all of a sudden, think, oh, I better say sorry for that. It just doesn't happen. Very rarely does it happen. But I think Lynn's mother, because I think Eve's mum and dad now are passed away, and I think Lynn's was at this time when these appeals were going ahead in 2015, 2016, still alive. And as she said, it's been 40 years since her daughter had been taken away from her. Now they have had nothing. They've had no, luckily they've got the bodies, but they've had no justice for her. They'd also worried about this man being out there and doing it to other people. Because he'd done it to her daughter. He could have done it to anybody. So I think for Lynn's parents, it was frustrating, and for Eve's parents, very, very frustrating that this crime was never solved. These crimes were never solved. But both of them, actually both families, all the families, were so concerned that this person that did this to their children was out there and probably doing it to others. And so they really pushed for appeals and really tried to keep these cases in the public eye. More, yes, they wanted to find who killed their daughter, of course you would, their daughters, but more so, as they said, to protect people, to make people aware, listen, there is someone out here that has done these terrible crimes and has never been caught. So all of a sudden we think, okay, these two cases are linked. Now there is another case that is linked mainly not by DNA, but by the MO. Now her name is Linda Farah. Now the murderer 4 years after Eve Stafford's murder of the pregnant mother of two, Linda, they had such strong similarities to Eve's death. Now I think Linda, now she actually worked in the same sort of industry as Eve did. Also, she was killed within her home, the same as Eve. Not the same as Lynn, but the same as Eve. So she was 29-year-old. She had recently left her husband and taken her children to live with her boyfriend when an intruder broke in and stabbed her repeatedly. Now, I know you're all going to say the husband did it. He didn't do it. Absolutely, he didn't do it. It was a horrific scene, and it was discovered by her daughters, who were 8 and 11 years old at the time, when they came home from school. Unable to get in, they peered through the letterbox, and that's the sort of scene that they found. Now, police were convinced Linda knew her killer. She knew him because, again, there was no forced entry into her home at all. She had let the person in. Very similar to Eve's case. And also, this was in Woodford Green, East London. Same sort of areas as well. So her boyfriend and her husband were quickly eliminated, actually, from this investigation. And I'm glad they did, because when you look at the similarities here, I think people think, oh, because he's the ex, they all got on well. They all got on well. These were eliminated. There was nothing. But this girl worked in the same industry. So we're looking at victimology. You're trying to relate. Do they know each other? Have they ever met? Are they working in the same industry? Yes, they were. Yes, they were. They were killed in the same way. The knife. They were killed in the home. Their own homes. Again, very rare for someone to break in your home and kill you. And then we have 2 of them within 4 years. So I think there was a hunt centred on, actually, a witness described a well-built man in his 30s with an afro hairstyle, wearing a donkey jacket, who was seen running away from the scene. Now remember, in Eve's case, there was no real witnesses who heard the person saying downstairs in the bottom flat. She could hear a man and a woman's voice and then a bump. In this murder, we have someone that actually saw someone running away. And I also said in Eve's that I didn't think the perpetrator was wealthy. Now, when you're in a donkey jacket, that means that you are working. You're working. So as I said, did he know them from working in these clubs? from maybe building something around these clubs, from just frequenting these clubs, but not in that way. Was he delivering? Was he doing something? This man, this killer, was not a wealthy man. Now, DCI Colin Sutton. Now, you've got to love him, haven't you? He's great. Now, he was a detective that led the investigation actually into the Levi Belfield case. Very, very good detective he is. And I don't think he stops, Colin. I think he just goes for it. You know, he's got something in his mind. He's usually right, actually, to tell you the truth. I think he's quite savvy when it comes to the profiling of certain killers, and he was the one that has said, listen, you know, and he said, I think since 2015, that Eve Stafford and all the evidence that was available to them, you know, was all sent to this, all of it was sent to this scientific analysis, because he believed that Linda, Eve and Lynn are all linked. They're all the same killer. Now, we know Eve and Lynn is because the DNA link of the perpetrator. But this case, you know, Linda's case, she is definitely a victim of the same killer. There's too much to say that she isn't, really. Now, it was disappointing that the evidence in Linda's murder hadn't been checked for DNA, and really, you know, I don't know why. In you know, a lot of officers keep, you know, when they go in, the forensic team, not even in 1975, you had detectives, they were quite savvy about keeping certain pieces of, you know, evidence and stuff, and some weren't. And as I said to you before, if you haven't got the evidence securely taken, packed away, stored, refrigerated, whatever else you need to do to make sure that you can get the DNA, not only a DNA, because now we don't need much DNA, but a tiny sample would do it, but it has to be a good sample, really, meaning a good sample to be relied on as evidence. So you can test whatever you want, and now with DNA you can test stuff really which is so low grade you wouldn't believe it. But unless it's been stored properly and everything else, it's not admissible in court. So it's really important that any DNA, anything, any evidence is stored correctly for a very long time. And that's how cold cases are solved. But I think, you know, DCI Colin Sutton is right when he's linked the three of these murders together. Absolutely. I think the MO shows that this man is happy to kill inside or out, middle of the day, in the evening. I do think he is a stalker type person. I do think at least two of these victims knew him. But I don't think that Lynn did. I think she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Okay, so we now think, or really, I think we all have to agree with Colin Sutton, but I'd like your opinions whether you think it's a different perpetrator or not that killed Lynn or Linda. So you have this DNA now, you have the profile from Eve and Lynn from 1975. Then 4 years later, now, 1979, you have Linda now murdered by what we assume to be the same perpetrator. There is no DNA evidence really collected from that scene that can be used now to determine whether the same killer or not, okay? But I think if you are looking in a profiling way, the radius is there, so geographical, you have the MO very similar, or similar, exactly similar actually, to Eve's. You have then, not that they knew each other, but they were linked by what they did for a living. or similar live-ins. You have them both now killed in their homes in the day. One we have now a male voice, so we knew it was a male in Eve's, and then we have a sighting of a man in a donkey jacket with afro hair. So we have sort of these links, and I think DCI Colin Sutton, you know, I have to agree with him. I think they are linked. So, but we would never, would we? And I think this is what this case is really about. So when we're talking about DNA, we're talking about now forensic, genealogist or genealogy. So as I said to you before, I would love to do cold cases, but this is the difficulty with cold cases, is because you're relying on what was collected 30, 40, 50 years ago, if you're going to use DNA evidence. Now, I'm not saying that they can't get DNA 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, because we can. And this is why a lot of these killers should now be worried, because you can get it. And then not only can we track them, but really it starts off, doesn't it, with, genealogists actually tracing your family history to bring you down from thousands to 6 or 7 people, and then from there the investigation is much more easier. But the problem is with that, it takes time and it takes money. And by the time you're probably going to catch this man now, you know, if he's not dead already, but it would be interesting, wouldn't it? And it would solve these cases. But there's so much money, and I think and it's not even about the money, I think, that hold these police officers up. It is about the time, because, as I said, we don't know how many murders this man's done, but we know there's plenty of more murderers out there, and as they're trying to work on these cold cases and stuff, more and more come in all the time. So you have a lot now of ex-police officers, ex everything, you know, lawyers and everything I know now that work on cold cases, because one, it's very interesting, and two, you want to solve a murderer. You know, you want to solve a murder. And three, you want to get a murderer off the street. That's the whole thing. Because a murderer, if he kills in his 20s, who's to say he's not going to kill in his 80s? Of course he is. If he's not caught, of course he is. So in this case, the DNA profile's not there. So he couldn't have been arrested within the last 20 years, or else his DNA profile would have been on the database. So, okay, he's quite a intelligent criminal, as most people like him are. He didn't leave a lot of stuff anyway at his crime scenes at all. But did he, if he continued on to kill later on, after 1979, 80s, 90s, 2000s, which he could have well done, he would have been forensically aware then. And then, you know, and also because his MO's changed so much, the crimes weren't linked to him. Anyway, so, listen, this man could have died, he could have moved abroad, he may have come from abroad, he may have only been here working for 6, 8 months and then come back again. You don't know, do you? But if it was him that done Linda's murder, he was here in 1975 and he was here in 1979. And up until now, we don't know of any other murders that are linked to this profile at all. So did he go back? Did he die? Was he in prison? What else happened to him? Really, we're not going to know. I don't know if these cases can be solved, to tell you the truth, and it won't be unless these forensic teams that are working on it find something, you know, that's going to link this man. But if he's not in the system, there's nothing. There's just nothing. So it's likely, isn't it, that the suspect of both these murders in the 60s and the 70s, would be in his 60s or 70s now, if he is alive or still in this country. I think, though, with this man, he's a very dangerous man. He's a very dangerous man. He was, and if he's still alive, he still would be. Because of his MO, it changes. And when you have someone that, like this perpetrator, that will, in broad daylight, knock on someone's door, hand them a cheap bunch of flowers, dried flowers that he's probably picked and done himself, and then murder them, and then calmly walk out. And then 6 months later, murder a 16-year-old in an alleyway. And then if it was Linda's killer, to do the same thing 4 years later. What's it done in between? What worries me. Again, to go into someone's home. There was no forced entry here. How did he get in? How did he get in? They either knew him or they trusted him to be something he wasn't. So listen, this has been the case of the linked DNA. The case that links this murderer to 2 of the victims. But I think really it probably links to the 3rd victim as well. All these cases remain unsolved. This perpetrator has never ever been found. There isn't even been a hint of who he is, even though that there is a DNA profile. That's it. I hope you found this case interesting. You know what to do. Thumbs up if you liked it. You can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us on Facebook. You can have a listen to this on podcast, Spotify when it's down. You can subscribe anytime you would like. So, thank you for watching, my partners in crime. Until the next time. Bye-bye.